and go. Okay, hi YouTube. Let's see. I had a question about why I prefer brass locomotives over plastic the other night in one of the chat forums I go to. And I made this video in hopes of answering that question. This is my latest acquisition of brass. I got this about a year ago and just about a week ago started working on it. I got this off one of our favorite auction sites. I think I paid $135 for it. It's a 280 consolidation, specifically made for B&O, the prototype, that is, not this one. And it's actually made by a company in Japan called United. I don't believe they're in business anymore. And was marketed in the U.S. Through Pacific Fast Mail. And this is a good example of a high-quality brass engine. It can run quite slowly, as I'll show here in just a second. And let's see, what is our time at this point? Yeah, we're coming up on it. Let's see. Excuse the delay here. And almost there. And stop. Alright. Well, when I said stop, exactly 2 minutes had passed. Now, what does that have to do with anything, you might say? Well, during that 2 minutes, the drivers went around one complete revolution in 2 minutes. That is much slower than prototype speed, quite a little bit slower than prototype speed. In fact, on the prototype they would have called that a leaky throttle. So it would never be run at that rate of speed on the prototype. So I'm happy that it's running slower than I'll ever need to run it. Now, how did I get to that point was another part of the question. What do I have to do to make these locomotives run as smoothly as I do? Because this guy had always heard that brass did not run very well, that it was very problematic to make it run nice and smooth. Well, yeah, if you don't do anything to them and you just run them straight out of the box, they can be a little, they're not necessarily going to be the best runner. This one, as it turned out, wasn't too bad straight out of the box for as old as it was. So let me tell you what I do. First thing I do is I strip the entire locomotive down. Separate the tender, and then take off the body, the boiler, and the cab. Get it down to just the frame, which means the drivers all have to come out, the pilot comes off, the motor comes out, the gearbox comes out. The gearbox is right behind here. And that's where I began, is with the gearbox. Is disassembly of the gearbox to check and see what condition the gears are in, and to clean out the old grease that was put in there in the late 60s. That's what I think when I think this particular locomotive happened to be built, was the late 60s. There are some indications of that on it, like no nameplate on the bottom and other little things. But yeah, I'd say this was probably manufactured in the late 60s. First thing, that gearbox comes apart. Inspect the gears and clean out all the old dried out grease that's in it. because it is dried out at that point in time, and causing very sluggish running. Now this one wasn't too bad. This one was actually fairly clean. Most of the grease, there was minimal grease in it, but it was still all dried up and needed to be gotten out of there. Once that's done, I lube up the gearbox. I do not use grease. I use just a tiny bit of synthetic clock oil. This oil is made for, and this is what I use to lubricate the entire locomotive in the end, but this lubrication is made for lubricating mantle clocks, grandfather clocks, things of that sort. And it's guaranteed for about 5 years of service before you have to re-oil. So that's what I use. And it is a synthetic product. It's safe on plastics, and I believe the worm in this is a brass worm with a nylon ball gear. So once I get that done, the next problem I tackle is the suspension. Now, on each of these axles, I make sure each one is in quarter, which I've never found one to not be in quarter. And once I'm assured that these are all in quarter, then I take on the suspension, which is on each side, in each frame, there is a bearing, and between the frame and the bearings are springs, little small springs. And I've taken apart I've done probably about 4 or 5 brass locomotives, and almost every time it seems like they use a really stiff spring, like the train, like the model's going to be run over gravel or something. I don't understand it, but they're much too hard. And so whenever, if there were just a little tiny piece of ballast or something on the track, the whole train would tip when it'd run over that, and therefore lift up the entire side of the locomotive and lose all contact on this side. And in DC, of course, that means you instantly stop. There are no capacitors in there. So that's probably another reason why people don't think that brass locomotives run that well. So what I do is I take out those old springs and I replace them with some springs from Northwest Shortline, which I've got here. And these are their light springs. And for a locomotive of this size, this is only 8 inches long and weighs 14 ounces. That's just 2 inches, or 2 ounces shy of a pound. But I put in these softer springs, and they really do make a difference in how the wheels contact the rail. Each separate driver now will lift without too much without lifting the whole side of the locomotive. So that's one of the first things that gets done. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a little bit. The second thing I do, after that's done and I've got the suspension all back together, I replace the motor. Here's the original motor that was in the locomotive. This is a standard Pitman motor. These were used in, it seems like, every brand of locomotive there was back during the 70s and 60s and probably even the 80s. They're a good little motor, but they just aren't smooth runners until they get up to, I'd say about 120 RPM. And by that time, the locomotive is moving down the track. So they're not good low-speed running motors. But I'm going to keep this one. I've got a turntable that I've got to build. Actually, I've got several. And I'll probably use this to power the turntable, since it will be geared much lower than the Locomotive is. So, I should point out too, these brushes, they aren't even worn in yet. They're not even worn in. And that kind of indicates to me that this Locomotive has not seen a lot of miles. Another thing that indicates that to me is on the tread itself, on the tire tread itself, there's no wear. So this might have been a shelf queen for some collector. It's kind of hard to tell. So next, after that, I go ahead and I install a Dcc decoder, and in this case I do it back in the tender. In this case I did, and in fact that's where I almost always install them. Rarely is there enough room in the boiler, because every brass locomotive I've ever seen, the boiler is hollow, but they fill it from probably about here back to here with a big plug of I don't know, it could be lead, it could be pot metal. It's something to add to the weight, and that's one of the reasons why this weighs 14 ounces. So I don't want to really replace that, because that weight, we want that weight. It adds to the tractive force, and you can pull more cars. Not that I intend on pulling a whole lot of cars, but there are guys out there who do like to pull a lot of cars. They like to see long trains. Not really my thing, but my thing, there are guys that like that, and it's not all about me after all. Let me pull this ahead a little bit. That's moved to speed step 3, and that's a more prototypical start right there. That's a little bit better. Let me back out here just a little bit. And yeah, that should be good. Okay, now about those springs. I'm going to take a screwdriver here. You can see that's a fairly fine bit on there. And what I'm going to do is just lay it just on the top edge of this rail. And now what I'm going to do is increase my speed. Let's go to speed step 4 and watch each wheel. And each wheel rises over that, independently of the other wheels lifting off the track. If you can see that. And so what this does is this maintains traction of the locomotive without, there I had just a little bit of body lift, but I think that's because I shifted my screwdriver a little bit. Yeah, there it did it again too. So, but yeah, you can see there how the wheels independently lift. Now when I had those stiffer springs in there before, that was it wouldn't do that. The whole locomotive would rock, like I said. So once I've got those problems solved, then it's on to the installation of the Dcc decoder. And in this case, I'm using one by TCS, Train Control Systems. The WOW sound, it's actually WOW 101. Specific number 1517, and it does have a keep alive system with it too. And this one's version 4, the latest version, or at least as far as I know, that's the latest version. Yeah, I find them to be very good decoders. I've used other decoders before, and this one, I really like it. For the speaker, I did use a Soundtrax, I believe it's Soundtrax 28 millimeter mega bass. So, speaking of sound, let's back up just a little bit here. give you an example of that sound. Alright, that should probably do it. Cut her down here. Cut to 0. And let's hear the sound. Okay. First thing I'll do is put it in the forward gear. And let's turn on the generator and get some lights. Air pump kicked in. There's long horn, short horn, bell, and a grade. Let's do a grade crossing. Oh, part of the end there, that was me, right? Okay, let's pull forward. Let's get up to speed step. Oh, we'll see how far we go. There's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's try 11. You can see it runs fairly smoothly. Throttle off, brake on. Okay. Reverse directions. And let's back up. Probably about the same amount. 6, 7. Yeah, let's go right to 11. And that's speed step 11 right there. Cut throttle, brakes. Noisy, nasty brake sound there. So, brake release, and back to forward. Okay, so I hope that answers questions you might have had about it. I'm just real happy with the brass. It's not that plastic's not any good, I just prefer the brass. I've got couple of great little plastic locomotives too, so there's nothing wrong with it. It's just what you're after. It's like I was saying about some guys wanting to run longer trains. They want to run long trains. It's not really my big thing. I like to do local and switching and stuff like that. So anyway, there you go. We'll bring it to a stop here, and hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you later.